Hey designers, welcome back to the studio. This tutorial pretty much wrap us up on our ribs and stringers project. And in the previous tutorial, we sort of talked a little bit about how to begin finishing, but this is sort of one step beyond finishing. I mean, I know there's the step of sort of like pulling off all of our bands and sort of trimming off any of the stringers that are maybe still dangling over the edge. But really, like what sounds like an easy thing to say, finishing, it's really kind of the pickiest work. If all the work up until this point has been sort of large scale work, adding big things, the finishing stages of this project, and honestly the finishing stages of any project, are usually the slowest, and there's the least amount of work that like really looks like it's getting done. So don't be surprised that if the project really feels like it's slowing down at the end. That's because finishing work is slow and it's small and it's delicate and it's picky, and you'll spend the whole day sanding a small bit instead of spending a whole day assembling your whole project. But it is really nice to sort of see if all of that work pays off, right? So I've got a couple of examples here. Some of the things, went okay. Some of these things went great. Some of the things didn't, go so well. Only after, doing this project a few times have I really kind of figured it out. So if you run into kind of a couple mistakes along the way on yours, don't worry. I mean, this is your first attempt at the project, so don't expect yours to come out perfect on the first try. This is really much more about kind of getting the experience and kind of understanding how these larger projects unfold over time. That said, I do have one more thing to kind of add on to the back end of our finishing project. I'm going to set this guy aside and when we finish him up in school. And I'm going to talk about this guy, which you guys have seen in school more than in the tutorials. In my original sketches, I didn't have it just end hard at my anchor ribs. In my original design, I had designed it maybe flowed end to end a little bit better, but because of the limitations of our stringers, they don't bend over quite the way I want them to without snapping at the end. And so I'm going to use foam instead, or I'm going to kind of use a stacked lamination of layers of foam core and sort of fill that in. So I'll talk through that process a little bit today, and if any of you guys are interested in actually finishing off your either one or both ends of your ribbed and stringer piece in order to complete the form, complete the design, I'll have some of these materials available for you at school. The first thing I had to do was laminate up a block of foam core, and what I did was I put some spray adhesive on one side, stuck it in, spray adhesive, stuck it together, spray adhesive, stuck it together. So I'm basically stacking a little bit of glue in between each one of these layers. You could do the exact same thing if you don't have access to the spray studio at school of putting a little bit of PVA glue. What you're going to want to do if you do a PVA glue approach is hit corner to corner and edge to edge. You want to get glue over the entire surface. That's why the spray adhesive is kind of nice. At that point, I took this block, I mapped the sort of edge, mapped my design up onto the edge of the block and drew a line. I was really careful at this point to align the sort of grain, if you will, or the sort of stacking orientation of the I was really careful to make sure that the orientation of the foam core, the grain, if you will, was sort of in the right direction, knowing that I was going to be rounding off the ends. Once I had my templates drawn in, I took it over to the bandsaw and hogged off some of the waste. We have a bandsaw at school, and that makes this kind of work a lot easier. The hogging off the waste is really just going to sort of save us a lot of carving time in the end. You can see how much sort of extra material I can just sort of quickly snip off the outside. This is a pretty rough cut though, and so I've cut it larger than what I will eventually need, and I'm gradually working my way down closer and closer to the sort of exact fit. I'm always going to go slightly larger and work down. If I was going for an exact cut around the edges here, I might goof it up, right? The bandsaw can be a very precise tool, but generally isn't when I'm working with material like this. So What the more precise tools are would be the carving tool, to be able to go from a simple sort of dimensional blank to being able to round that off. Now what I'm going to use is essentially a larger version of our X-Acto blades. These snap knives can be really, really handy because they have a whole bunch of blades sort of stored in, and when they go dull, you just kind of crack off the blade and you have another nice sharp edge. But what I also really like them for is I can kind of push them forward and expose a lot more of the sharp edge. Now that is a little bit more of a dangerous way of working with this tool, but let me show you why working with the sort of longer cutting edge of these can be really nice. Instead of sanding this all back, that would take, it would work, but it would take a very long time. I'm going to keep hogging off some of that waste again. And because I've got a brand new blade in here, a really nice fresh blade, I'm able to just sort of slice through those layers of foam core. Now, because I have so much of that blade exposed, I'm going to be very careful and always make my cuts away from my fingers. Occasionally, you will see me sort of do a wood carving technique of actually pulling the blade towards myself. This is a situation where I'm not going to be cutting toward myself at all. These blades, there's just way too much of that razor blade exposed for me to want to get my skin anywhere near that guy. So you can see how with just a few minutes of work here, I'm already kind of starting to kind of shape over this round. Where I'm eventually going with this design is I would like to sort of have this I'd like to have this form, this line sort of continue down and taper down to the edge. I'm going to carve in my blanks, within maybe a few millimeters of where I eventually want them to be, using this technique of the longer snap knife, and then eventually I will go down and then eventually I'll start to use sandpaper. Now we might actually even be able to use something like a belt sander, which is a power sander at school, to sort of get this even closer, but you're still going to want to, at the very end, right, be using a sanding block to sort of fine-tune all of that work. Essentially, I'm working from really, really rough cuts to gradually finer and finer versions. Now, here's an example, right, of how I have done something similar, where I've just sort of used that foam to finish off the end caps of of one of the ribbon stringer pieces I demonstrated at the very beginning of this tutorial series. It can be just kind of an interesting way of finishing that design. Whether you guys decide to kind of approach this with one of your pieces or not, I'll just kind of consider it an extra add-on experience for you. I'm excited to see how your pieces come out in the end anyway. I'll catch up with you guys in the studio.